I know this is probably going to be a shock to a lot of people, but I kinda love Dark Souls 3. So today, we're doing something that's never been done before on the entirety of YouTube. A Dark Souls 3 boss tier list. I know, it's probably the most creative video I've ever made. Nah, but for real though, I absolutely love Dark Souls 3. It's one of my favorite games of all time. I've played through it more times than I can count, and to this day, it's never gotten old. So I thought it might be fun to give my 2 cents on the best and worst bosses in the game. Now with all that being said, let's dive straight in, starting with the first boss and working our way up from there. First up, we got Gundyr. Gundyr is a very well done tutorial fight. He's challenging for a first playthrough, and he teaches you how both humanoid and beast-type bosses are going to function in the game by having him transform from massive knight to, fucking abomination when he hits half health. His arena is amazing and his OST bangs, which only adds to the quality of this fight. I also like how they designed the game in a way that you have no choice but to overcome this obstacle before accessing the rest of the game. It instills in the player's mind to not give up in frustration when they encounter a wall later in the game, as well as filter out players that don't enjoy the high difficulty of these games. But most importantly, it forces players to experience the best part of the Souls series, at least in my opinion. The thing that made me and so many other people fall in love with them. The sense of accomplishment that accompanies overcoming an extremely challenging foe. That feeling carried me through every moment in my first playthrough that I felt like quitting out of frustration, and resulted in me falling in love with this amazing series of games. If this ranking was based off just one playthrough, I would probably say that Gundyr is an A-tier boss, but unfortunately, he has next to zero replay value. Once you know how this fight works, you can take off half of his health bar before he even stands up. Not to mention, parries make this fight an absolute joke in Phase 1, and when he transitions into second phase, just walk left and punish. All in all, his amazing placement as a tutorial boss mixed with his lack of replay value forced me to place him in the high B tier. Next up, we got Vort of the Cocaine Demon Dogs. Vort is an absolute joke of a boss. Seriously, I don't even know what his moveset looks like, but I am all too familiar with those luscious cheeks of his, as all you have to do in this fight is stand behind him, and he becomes more confused than me when my girlfriend tries to explain the validity of TikTok to me. Seriously though, the fight might be a joke, but the atmosphere, OST, and visual design of this boss keeps him well above the worst fights in the game. The thing about Vort is, he isn't really fun to fight due to him being really easy, but he's also not annoying to fight like some of the later bosses. I would say that Vort is top of C tier. Not offensive, but not that enjoyable either. Next up, we got the Curse-Rotted Greatwood, and oh my god is this fight a disaster. The arena full of enemies that basically do nothing is shit. The boss's attacks are next to impossible to die to, and the weak spot gimmick is extremely annoying, especially when this overgrown, pussing hydrangea has his hands clipping through the arena for half the goddamn fight. The only cool thing about this boss to me is the phase change. No, not when his gross-ass hand that amounts to nothing pops out of his deformed nutsack. I'm talking about when he butt slams the arena, causing you to fall into the curse-rot depths. That part was cool, but not anywhere near enough to drag this disgusting mess any higher than the bottom of C tier. Next up, we got the Crystal Sage. Now, I'm not gonna say that Miyazaki hates the player base, but I do have to question the decision to have 2 of the worst areas in the game back to back right at the beginning, and rewarding us making it through that shitscape with 2 of the worst bosses in the entire game. Don't get me wrong, Crystal Sage is slightly better than Curse-Rotted Greatwood, but that's a lot like saying a fart sandwich is slightly less offensive than a shit sandwich. This big floppy dildo is so slow in his first phase that you could quickly knock out the SATs while waiting for him to cast his next attack. Not only is he absurdly slow, but he also does one of the most annoying things bosses in these games can do. Teleports around randomly, forcing you to wait for him to reappear before you can continue beating his ass to a pulp. His phase change is enough to catch you off guard during your first playthrough, but once you realize the gimmick, topped by the fact that he and the clones always spawn in the same locations, it becomes just as trivial as phase 1. Just stand in front of this clone and quickly kill him. Then duck behind this wall to avoid the other clone's attacks while looking for the real Sage, then beeline his bitch ass and delete him in like 2 swings. I would say low C tier, but still better than this nonsense. Next up, we got the Deacons of the Deep, and honestly, this is one of my least favorite fights in the entire game. This slogfest is basically the weed-whacking simulator that is the first phase of the Divine Dragon fight in Sekiro, except this time, you don't get any satisfaction of an amazing second phase. No, instead you just genocide some Christians until the fucking Pope rolls up, only to be deleted faster than my search history before my girlfriend borrows my computer. This fight is pure ass, low D tier. Next up, we got the Abyss Watchers, and oh my god, is this a fitting reward for the ass fuckery that we just experienced in the Fair and Keep. Had this boss been as underwhelming as the last two, I may have stopped playing the game here, but old King Mizzy had to hit us with one of the best fights in the game. Abyss Watchers is one of the coolest ideas for a boss that I've ever seen. You enter the arena and find that the Watchers have been corrupted by the Abyss, and thus are fighting each other. This at first appears to just be an interesting cutscene that doesn't amount to anything, but when he reaches half health in phase 1, one of the Watchers rises and starts helping you down the boss. I've never experienced a boss fight where the boss itself is partially on your side, so that was really cool. But not only is the fight gimmick one of my favorites in the entire series, the moveset of the Watchers is fast, well telegraphed, extremely responsive, more fluent than me in English, not that that's saying much, and above all, balanced in a way that remains challenging even after countless playthroughs, provided that you don't use cheese methods, of course. But the crowning achievement of this fight is the second phase, when the main Watcher draws the power of the rest and proceeds to transform into an anime protagonist with his flaming sword and acrobatic moveset designed to dice you up like a ripe tomato faster than you can say, "What the fuck is Commander Yamamoto doing in my Souls game?" The switch-ups in the way you have to dodge due to the lingering flame makes this one of the most diverse fights in the game, and an absolute blast to revisit every time. Not to mention that OST slaps so hard, I want to make it my fucking ringtone. Easy A tier boss, not quite at the same level as some of the later fights in the game, but still an absolute joy every time I fight them. Next up, we got the Vape Lord himself, and holy fuck is he a disaster. Not only is this fight stupid easy, but it can also be incredibly annoying. This big bony prick constantly hides his right hand in his vape cloud of instant death, while simultaneously taking until the heat death of the universe to put his left one back on the goddamn ground so you can hit it. Not to mention, he occasionally just spams his vape attack, forcing you to just stand at the top of the arena and wait for it to dissipate. But not only that, it's sometimes impossible to see where the vape cloud actually is, resulting in your immediate death. Don't get me wrong, all of these things are extremely easy to avoid. In fact, you can destroy both of the bracers on his left hand before the lazy prick even moves, but if for some reason he has a weird opening, like when he immediately pulls his right hand into the vape cloud, then be prepared to stand around for minutes on end while you wait for him to finally allow you to hit it again. But don't take too long or he starts to summon these wheelie fucks. Jesus Christ, I hate this fight so much. Bottom of D tier for this absolute trash basket. Next up, we got the Old Demon King, and this might be the most average fight in the game. He's decently challenging for a first playthrough, though he becomes a bit of a joke in subsequent ones. He has a decent moveset that requires you to pay attention, but doesn't really challenge your reaction timing or strategical positioning that much. His OST is pretty good, I think it matches the fight well, but it's far from my favorite in the game. He is extremely slow, except for one move, which usually results in a pretty boring fight in my opinion, but they do counter that by having him hit like a fucking Mack truck riding a bullet train, so there is that. Not much more to say about this guy. He's just a really average fight. Low B tier. Next up, we have the best fight that we've talked about thus far. Pontiff Sulyvahn. This fight is incredible. Everything from the OST to the moveset is so well crafted that it's hard to believe he's not even cracking the top 5 on this list. That speaks to the staggering boss quality in the late game, but we'll get to that later. Pontiff is a masterclass in game design. No matter how many times I fight this dude, he's still capable of shredding through me if I get careless. This fight, however, can be trivialized with parrying, which you think would keep him a bit lower on the list for me, though I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing, considering his level of difficulty otherwise, meaning baking in a way for new players to overcome him, provided they can master the parry, actually adds to the genius of his design. His first phase is an absolute blast without the parry, but it's also just immensely satisfying to slap his sword away and drive yours straight through his chest. Then phase 2 hits and turns this fight up from 8 to 11 as his clone starts to dice you up along with him. The fact that the clone telegraphs the boss's next attack is brilliant. The moveset stays the same, but because of the second Pontiff, the way you dodge the moveset changes. It provides a difficult new challenge while also rewarding you for your mastery of phase 1. The only thing I dislike about this fight is the dogshit arena. Sure, it looks amazing, but sometimes fighting in this place is an absolute nightmare, especially if he catches you in the hallway leading up to him. There's just so much shit that you can potentially run into, and it takes away from the immersion of the fight itself. Even with the less than great arena though, Pontiff is easily a mid-A tier fight. Next up, we got Yorm the Giant. Yorm is one of the better gimmick fights in the series, in my opinion. Sure, he's super easy, but you can't deny how satisfying it is to unleash this anime storm right in his non-existent face. I was a bit disappointed in this fight the first time around as he was hyped up so much in the opening cinematic, but on subsequent playthroughs, I've actually found myself enjoying this fight more and more. It's a nice little break from some of the more challenging fights in the game, while also offering a spectacle that, in my opinion, never gets old. He isn't an amazing fight, but he's definitely far from terrible. I would say he deserves low B tier, slightly better than old Demon King, but not by much. Alright, next up we got Alt Bitch. What can I say about Alt Bitch? Well, he's a total bitch. Seriously, another piss-easy Lord of Cinder? What the fuck, King Mizzy? Aside from my first playthrough, I don't think I've ever come close to dying against this glorified speed bump. He is slow as hell. He has like 4 attacks, and if you get behind him, you can autistically stand there hitting his slug ass for like a full minute, till he finally fucks off again. The fire buff that he gets at half health doesn't add any significant challenge to this fight, as you can just force your way through it and stand behind him again. The only attack in this fight that's slightly difficult to deal with is the arrow barrage, and even that's fairly easy to avoid due to its insane wind-up time that allows you to just run out of range and circle back in as it dissipates. If I was rating these bosses based off of my expectations versus reality, he would be somewhere near the bottom of the list, but since I have to take the other fights into account, I would say that Aldrich is just below Yorm. He isn't annoying to fight, but the lack of challenge, especially this late in the game, is definitely a bit disappointing. That being said, his visual design and OST are incredible, which raise him up in the ranking a little bit for me. Low B tier. Next up, we have the first S tier fight in the game, in my opinion. Dancer of the Boreal Valley. The Demon Dog's other half is one of the most impressive fights in the game, in my opinion. Her visual design, OST, and arena are all amazing, but the fight itself trumps everything. Her moveset is beautiful and an absolute blast to master. Her strange movements make her really difficult to time properly, though never feel unfair as they're telegraphed so well. I honestly don't think this boss is as challenging as people make it out to be if you fight her at the proper time, either after Aldrich or Yorm. But if you attempt this fight near the beginning of the game, it becomes one of the more challenging fights in the series. The only thing I'm not a huge fan of when it comes to the Dancer is if you hug her hip in the first phase, she often won't even attack you for whatever reason, and it just seems like something that the devs should have ironed out before release. Even with that small hiccup though, I would still say this is one of the best fights in the game. Easy S tier. Next up we got Osiris the Consumed King. Osiris has a reputation for being difficult, and for the life of me, I cannot figure out why. This useless cancer lizard is an absolute joke. I've played DS3 more times than I can count, and I'm pretty sure this dude has only killed me once. That being said, the atmosphere of this fight is absolutely incredible. Everything from the design, the voice acting, the OST, and the arena are all crafted perfectly. The only issue I have with this boss is the lack of difficulty, especially this late in the game, and his charge attack is not very well telegraphed. Though it's extremely easy to avoid by just standing behind him, since he only has one move to counter this in his tail swipe, and it's extremely easy to avoid. All in all, I don't dislike this boss, but it's not top tier either. I would say high B tier. Next up, we got Dragon Slayer Armor, and oh my god do I love this fight. I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but he's one of my favorite fights in the entire game. His moveset is extremely well telegraphed, yet still such a fun challenge even after countless playthroughs. He hits like a goddamn asteroid, he's deceptively fast, and his recovery time is perfectly balanced to give you opportunity for at least one hit between attacks if you dodge into the correct position, while also denying you that chance if you don't. The only thing I'm not a big fan of in this fight are the stupid shit flies on the side that spit rusty ass water at you in Phase 2. Don't get me wrong, it's easy to avoid by just walking away from the Dragon Slayer when you hear the attack, but it interrupts the brilliant pacing that makes me love this fight, which kinda sucks ass, honestly. Even with that little blemish though, Dragon Slayer, in my opinion, is a near perfect fight. Easy S tier and the best boss in the main game. Next up, we got Champion Gundyr. This boss is another one that has a general consensus of being really hard, and again, I never understood why. I clapped him first try in my first playthrough, and most playthroughs since. I never understood the praise his difficulty got until about a month ago when I did a playthrough of this game. I have no clue if I just got lucky every time I've fought him in the past, but this big silver fuck killed me about 5 times in a row before I finally downed him. The weird thing is, I don't even think I was doing anything different than usual, but for whatever reason, he decided to go Super Saiyan and clap my cheeks like my name was Kim Kardashian or something. This was the first time that I found out that he can dropkick your ass in midair for like 90% of your health. It was insane. But my lack of skill aside, I absolutely love this fight. I've never fought him with parries, so that may trivialize it a bit, but in my experience, he's a fun challenge, even if it's rare that I lose to him. His moveset is well telegraphed and paced perfectly. His Phase 2 is an absolute blast in comparison to his Phase 2 at the beginning of the game, and his atmosphere is absolutely beautiful, from the dark version of his original arena to his amazing OST. I would say the champ deserves low A tier. Very, very well done fight. Next up, we got Prince Lorien and Lothric. This fight's an interesting one to rank. The atmosphere is no doubt flawless from the OST to the boss design, probably the best in the main game, but the fight itself is much harder to rank. It's just so RNG dependent that sometimes it's one of the easiest fights in the game, as Lothric just spams his 2-swipe attack, allowing you to just dodge twice and punish. And sometimes it's one of the hardest, as this fuck muppet teleports so often that it causes an epileptic seizure in whoever is playing. Don't get me wrong, I always enjoy this fight, but I wish that he would consistently land somewhere in the middle in terms of the amount he teleports, because right now, it seems like he either does it way too much or nowhere near enough. Phase 2's opening is brilliant though. I used to think that depending on how Lothric opens, damage was potentially unavoidable, but it's definitely not. Depending on what attack he's performing out of his teleport, Lorien's projectiles will fire at slightly different times to allow the attacks to sync up. The best way to avoid the opening is just ignore the projectiles until you deal with Lorien's teleport, then spam dodge for the remaining ones. Other than that, this phase is extremely similar to Phase 1, just slightly more intense as Lorien follows up some of his brother's attacks with a few different projectiles. Staying close to Lothric is the key in this phase, abusing his double slash to position behind him and get a free hit on Lorien. But sometimes the prick spams his teleport one-shot attack to keep you out of range. All in all, I think this is a really well-made fight, but it's a little bit too RNG dependent for my liking. I think he deserves the very top of A tier. Next up, we got what used to be my favorite fight in the main game, the Nameless King. I absolutely love Phase 2 of this fight, but Phase 1 is such a chore on subsequent playthroughs that it knocks this boss down to my second favorite in the main game. That speaks volumes to the quality of Phase 2 though, as it's still one of the best fights in the game, in my opinion. The atmosphere of this fight is my favorite in the entire game, other than maybe Gael, but it's close. His OST slaps, his arena is beautiful, and his visual design is the best in the entire game in my opinion. His moveset in Phase 2 is perfect. It's super well telegraphed, but also very challenging due to his devastating attack power. Dancing with this dehydrated grape is an absolute joy every time I go up against him. Easy S tier fight, and had they expanded his second phase, or made the first one more engaging, he would still be my favorite fight in the game, most likely. The last main game boss, Soul of Cinder, is a great example of how not to end a series like Dark Souls, and thank God we got DLC that rectified that. Don't get me wrong, he's not a bad fight, just way too easy for a final boss. His Phase 1 is an absolute joke. The only variant that poses even the slightest threat is the spear form, and you can usually burn him down before he even uses it. But it's not just the lack of challenge that makes Phase 1 a bore for me. He feels like a mashup of different NPC fights, which is cool in concept, but lacks the spectacle and challenge of not just a main game boss, but the last boss in the main game. His second phase isn't much better in terms of challenge, but the fact that he adopts Gwyn's moveset with some added twists and his OST is amazing. It's a perfect callback to the original game and an amazing send-off to the main series. At least in terms of lore. In terms of challenge and replayability, it's definitely lacking. So overall, I would say that the atmosphere and lore implications keep him higher on the list, but the lack of challenge definitely hurts its ranking for me. I would say very top of B tier. Okay, that's the main game out of the way, now let's talk about the DLCs. First up, we got Champion Gravetender and Gravetender's Wolf. What a sad opening to the Ashes of Ariandel. This glorified basic enemy poses no threat to anyone and can easily be killed before the wolf even shows up. And once he does, the fight becomes stand in one spot, pressing B as this fucking brainlet runs around the arena like his tail's on fire. Wait for the wolf to sit the fuck down and commit animal abuse, easy clap. Get the fuck out of my game. C tier. Next up, we got quite possibly the most divisive fight in the entire game. Sister Fried and Father Ariandel. If I'm being honest, I love all the phases of this fight separately, but with all three back to back, it becomes a little bit too long for my liking. I think this fight would be perfect if you removed Phase 1 and just started it as a gang fight. Don't get me wrong, Phase 1 is fairly easy to get through without taking too much damage, but it also for that reason kind of feels pointless, considering you get a way better version of it in Phase 3, and Phase 2 already makes the fight more than long enough. That being said, I think this might be the best gank fight in the series. They took the concept of Ornstein and Smaug having one insanely hard-hitting but slow enemy and one faster, less hard-hitting counterpart, though in my opinion, it's executed way better here than it was with ONS. It's much easier to split the pair up due to Ariandel's charge attack, but doesn't allow you to completely ignore one of them, as Frida has her ice attacks that can reach you from almost anywhere if you focus on Ariandel. And if you focus Frida, Ariandel comes out of nowhere and smokes you with his big-ass bull. That being said, they don't stack on top of each other like ONS do very often, which makes this fight remain challenging but not enter the territory of annoying BS like ONS do. I would say this boss deserves the very top of A tier. If you remove Phase 1, an argument can be made for S, but as it stands, A tier. That's it for Ashes of Ariandel. Now let's take a look at the better of the two DLCs, the Ringed City. First up, we got one of the other best gank fights in the series, the Demon Prince. I love this fight, which is saying a lot considering I normally don't enjoy the gank fights in this series. The Demon in Pain and Demon from Below AI work perfectly together, keeping the pressure high at all times while never feeling like an unfair spam fest. They balance the duo by having them exhaust after their Claw Flurry attacks, which allow you to focus on one for a short time before they both start attacking again, as well as having one usually stay back and hit you with spells as the other stays in melee range and fights you straight up. The mechanic that sees the two demons changing throughout Phase 1 is really interesting and keeps you on your toes, at least it did for me, as I always try to kill the demon from below first because it makes Phase 2 way more challenging and fun. Speaking of Phase 2, it's an absolute blast. The Demon Prince is basically just a souped up version of whichever demon you didn't kill first, but it introduces enough new elements to the fight to still be tremendously challenging. I know I probably said more good things about this fight than I did for Sister Frida, but I do enjoy that fight slightly more than this one. I would say that the Demon Prince comes in right between Champion Gundyr and Pontiff Sulyvahn, mid A tier fight. Next up we got Half-Light, and I have to say, this boss can fuck right off out of this game. It is so boring, I don't even know what to say about it. Either you fight it offline and it's not even a fight, or you do it online, in which case it can be anything from even easier than the offline mode to much harder depending on which player you get. I guess it's a cool concept, but to have one of the final bosses of the entire series be some lazy PvP fight feels like the devs just giving you a huge middle finger. Worst fight in the game in my opinion. Next up, we got Dark Eater Midir, and I know I'm gonna get mad hate for this, but I honestly don't think it's that great of a fight. His moveset is dumb simple, but he's still immensely challenging, as he has a health bar longer than the Dung Eater's list of character defects and hits harder than McDonald's after a whole half a zip. It's not the challenge that bugs me though, it's the way they went about making it challenging. For example, Ishin is challenging because he has a moveset deeper than Mariana's Trench and allows for very little time to breathe, while Midir has a deceptively simple moveset that tests your endurance more than anything. Not to mention he loves to run around the arena similar to the Elden Beast, which is the most annoying shit ever. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate this fight, not at all, but I don't think it's deserving of the amount of praise it seems to get. Visually, this boss is stunning, and his OST is an absolute banger. If he had a more varied moveset and less of a health bar, this fight would be easy S tier, but as it stands, I would say it's slightly better than Soul of Cinder, but not by that much. And lastly, we got not only the very last Dark Souls boss ever made, but also the very best. This fight is an absolute masterpiece from start to finish. His moveset is deeply complex and satisfying to fight against. His health is absurd, but it doesn't make the fight feel like a slog, and his second and third phases are both perfectly executed. When he starts to incorporate his cloak into his attacks, it changes up the dodge timing just enough to feel fresh and challenging while not feeling too overwhelming. Then phase 3 hits and that shit goes from 9 to 11 in an instant. The lightning forces you to manage your positioning as well as still focus on his moveset, causing the same effect as the switch to phase 2, a challenging yet gradual and fair expansion of his moveset. No matter how many times I fight Gael, it's always a treat and a challenge to go back up against him again. I wouldn't say it's the best boss FromSoft has ever made, but it's definitely top 5 and without question the best in the Souls series itself. His arena and OST are both of the highest quality, and this only adds to the amazing spectacle that is this fight. I honestly have nothing bad to say about Gael. He's damn near perfect and is well deserving of his spot at the very top of S tier. Best fight in the game, without question. And that's going to do it for the Dark Souls 3 bosses in terms of quality. I want to tackle their difficulty next, so if you guys think you would enjoy that, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching this video and for all the support on the channel. I really appreciate it. Now, get the fuck out of here and go play some DS3, and until next week, I'll be seeing you. Oh shit, I forgot about the Wyvern. It sucks.